The storm was raging the night my daughter abandoned her 3 children on my doorstep. She said it would only be for a little while, but she never came back. 13 years later, she returned with a lawyer accusing me of kidnapping the very children I had raised as my own. What she did not know was that I carried a leather folder filled with secrets that could shatter her case and reveal the real reason she had come back. The courtroom fell silent when I opened it, and everyone waited to hear the truth. If you enjoy powerful life stories like this one, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world and helps me keep sharing more stories with you. Now let me take you back to the night it all began. The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes every creak of a chair and every shuffle of paper sound like thunder. Outside rain hammered against the tall windows, streaking the glass as lightning cracked in the distance. It felt as if the storm outside had slipped into the room itself, hanging in the air between us. I sat there at the defense table, my hands clutching the worn leather folder I had carried with me for years. My name is Clara Whitmore, and at 67 years old, I never thought I would be standing trial accused by my own daughter. Across from me, Serena looked like she had stepped out of another world. Her hair was styled perfectly, her suit was sharp, and her lawyer stood beside her with the confidence of a man who had already decided the case was his to win. Yet her eyes betrayed her. Behind the polished exterior, I saw the same flicker of defiance she used to have as a teenager when she knew she was lying, but thought she could charm her way out of it. Only this time she was not a rebellious girl. She was a woman accusing her own mother of kidnapping. The judge, Samuel Rourke, cleared his throat, his voice echoing across the oak-paneled chamber. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his tone steady, but edged with curiosity, "you have heard the accusations against you. Your daughter claims you held her children against her will for more than a decade. Do you have anything to say to this court?" I took a deep breath. The folder trembled slightly in my grip. I could feel every pair of eyes fixed on me, waiting for an answer. "Your Honor," I began, my voice quiet at first, but growing firmer with each word, "I did not steal anyone. I did not kidnap those children. I raised them. I gave them a life when their mother left them with me and disappeared into the night." Whispers rippled through the room, hushed voices that carried disbelief, pity, or judgment. Serena's lawyer raised a hand and stepped forward. "Your Honor, my client was struggling with serious health issues at the time. She trusted her mother only for temporary care. Instead, Clara Whitmore exploited that vulnerability, cut her off, and alienated the children from their rightful mother. This is a textbook case of parental kidnapping." The word kidnapping sliced through me like a blade. I had spent years fighting against poverty, illness, and exhaustion to keep those children safe, and now I was being painted as a criminal. My gaze drifted to the gallery where the 3 faces that mattered most sat together in the 3rd row. Miles, now 21, his jaw set but his eyes filled with confusion. Isla, 19, clutching her sister's hand as if afraid to let go. Rose, 17, staring at me with wide, searching eyes. They looked like they were caught between 2 versions of reality, wondering which one would collapse first. The judge leaned forward, peering at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Whitmore, this court understands the difficulty of raising children under such circumstances. But the law recognizes the rights of a biological mother. If your daughter requests custody, the matter must be addressed seriously, unless, of course, you have evidence that changes the situation." My fingers tightened on the leather folder. For 13 years, it had sat on a shelf in my home unopened, except in my darkest nights when I doubted myself. Inside were the truths Serena had buried, the truths she never wanted the world to see. For a moment I hesitated. Revealing what lay inside meant exposing wounds that even my grandchildren had never known. But there was no choice now. "Your Honor," I said firmly, "this court has not yet heard the full story. There are things that must be revealed before any decision can be made." I lifted the folder slightly, and I caught the flicker of fear cross Serena's face. Her lawyer turned toward her in surprise, whispering quickly, but Serena did not respond. "What kind of documents are these, Mrs. Whitmore?" the judge asked. "Proof," I replied. "Proof of what really happened on the night my daughter left, and proof of why she has returned now after 13 long years." Serena's eyes widened. "Mom, please do not do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do what I asked. Tell the truth. The tension in the room grew almost unbearable. The rain outside seemed to beat harder, as if urging the story out of me. My grandchildren leaned forward in their seats, their faces pale, their hearts caught in the storm of words and revelations that hovered on the edge of being spoken. The lawyer tried to interject, insisting that nothing from the past could change the fact that Serena had legal rights as the mother, but I could see it in the judge's face. He wanted to hear what I had to say. He wanted to see what was in the folder. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake with Miles when he burned with fever, the afternoons I spent teaching Isla to speak again after months of silence, the evenings I sang Rose to sleep when she woke up sobbing from nightmares, 13 years of sacrifice of waiting for Serena to call, to write, to show that she still cared, 13 years of nothing, and now suddenly she appeared demanding them back. No, this was not about love. It was about something else, and I was ready to prove it. Yes, Your Honor, I said at last. I am prepared to present these documents. But before I do, you must hear my account of what happened on the night my daughter left her children on my doorstep. The judge nodded slowly, the weight of his decision pressing down on the entire room. Very well, Mrs. Whitmore. Tell us what happened that night. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, summoning the memory that had haunted me for over a decade. The storm outside rumbled like it remembered too. I opened my eyes ready to speak, ready to return to that night of betrayal, that night that changed everything. And with that, the courtroom fell silent again, waiting for me to bring the forgotten night back to life. The memory of that night has never left me. It clings to me like the smell of rain on old wood, vivid and unshakable. It was late October, and the wind howled through the marshes like a wounded animal. I was in my small cabin kitchen pouring chamomile tea to ease the ache in my joints after a long day, when I heard frantic knocks on the door. At first I thought it was the storm rattling the shutters, but then came a voice I knew too well. Mom, open up. When I pulled the door wide, there stood Serena. She was drenched, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes darting like a hunted animal, and beside her were the 3 children. Miles was clutching his sister's hands, his face pale and lips trembling. Isla's clothes were wrinkled, damp, and stained. Rose, the smallest, was barefoot, her thin arms wrapped around a plastic bag that sagged with a few scattered belongings. They looked more like strays than children. What on earth is going on? I demanded. Serena pushed past me without answering. She dropped the bag on the floor and ushered the children inside their shoes, leaving wet prints across the wooden boards. She was shaking, her voice sharp and hurried. Mom, I need you to keep them. Just for a while. A few weeks at most. I will come back when things are sorted. Sorted, I asked. What things? What happened, Serena? But she refused to answer. Instead, she crouched, kissed each child quickly on the cheek, and stood again, her movements restless, her eyes fixed on the door rather than on me. They will be fine here. You have always been better with them than I am. I will come back soon. I promise. The words I promise rang hollow even as she spoke them. Before I could stop her, she was at the door again. I called out her name, but she pulled her hood up, stepped into the rain, and was gone. The children rushed to the window, their small voices calling after her, Mommy, Mommy. Their little hands pressed against the glass, but her figure had already melted into the storm. A taxi pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the night. Inside the cabin, the storm of silence was worse than the one outside. Miles turned to me, his eyes wide. Grandma, when is she coming back? I swallowed the knot in my throat and forced myself to smile. Soon, sweetheart. Very soon. But in that moment I already feared the truth. The first night was chaos. Rose cried for hours, begging for the stuffed rabbit she had left behind. Isla clung to me so tightly my arms went numb. Miles tried to act brave, but I could hear him whimpering in the dark when he thought I had fallen asleep. I stayed awake until dawn, rocking Rose in my arms, whispering that everything would be all right, though I had no idea how it could be. Days passed, then weeks. Serena did not call. She did not write. The children asked about her constantly. Miles began wetting the bed again, shame burning in his young face. Isla, always so lively, fell silent, retreating into a world of her own where she did not have to ask questions without answers. Rose developed a cough that worsened at night, her tiny body shaking as if it could not hold the weight of her tears. I tried to find Serena. I went to her old apartment only to be told she had vanished without paying the rent. The landlady, a stern woman named Paula Sterling, handed me a box of forgotten belongings. Inside were scraps of the life my daughter had abandoned, photos, unpaid bills, and buried among them, papers that would later change everything. But at that time I was too overwhelmed to sift through the box. My only focus was the children. Money was scarce. My pension was barely enough to keep myself afloat, and now I had 3 more mouths to feed. I sold jewelry I had treasured since my youth. I took on weekend cleaning jobs at the docks. My neighbor Agnes Keller stepped in when I could not be in 2 places at once, watching over the children with a kindness that I will never forget. Despite all efforts, there were moments of despair. I remember one winter night when Rose's cough turned into a fever that would not break. At the hospital, the doctors asked for insurance, legal documents, parental signatures. I had nothing. I was only the grandmother with no legal authority to decide for them. That was the night I swore never to let us be powerless again. I found a lawyer, spent the little I had left, and began the long process of seeking guardianship. We placed notices in newspapers as the law required searching for Serena. No one came forward. No one answered. And so at last the court granted me legal guardianship. From that day forward, the children were mine in every way except by blood. Still, every birthday, every Christmas, they asked about their mother. And every time I told them gently, "She loves you, but she cannot be here right now," it was the only truth I could offer without shattering what little hope they had left. I kept her picture on the mantel. I saved every drawing they made for her, and I waited year after year for her return. And then after 13 long years of silence, she did return. Not with tears, not with apologies, not with a heart yearning to be reunited. She returned with a lawyer at her side, accusing me of theft, of kidnapping, of stealing the children she had once abandoned. The storm outside the courtroom raged louder, as if echoing the storm that had begun all those years ago. And as I stood there facing her once again, I knew that the truth of that night would be the key to everything. Raising 3 children alone was not something I had planned for at 60 years old, yet life rarely asks for permission before it delivers its burdens. The first year after Serena disappeared was the hardest. My cabin, already small and worn, suddenly had to hold the laughter, the tears, and the endless needs of 3 young children who had been left without answers. Each room echoed with their voices, and though it brought me purpose, it also reminded me every day of the shadow their mother had left behind. The morning started before dawn. I would rise with aching joints, my hands stiff from arthritis, and prepare porridge stretched thin with water instead of milk. Miles would try to help, insisting he was old enough to carry wood for the fire, though the logs were almost as heavy as he was. Isla lingered at the table in silence, pushing her spoon back and forth but rarely eating much. Rose clung to my skirt, too afraid to be out of sight for even a moment. The weight of responsibility pressed on me, but there was no room for weakness. Bills piled up. My pension had barely covered 1 person, and now it had to stretch for 4. I sold the silver bracelet my mother had given me on my wedding day. I pawned my sewing machine, which had once kept food on the table during leaner years. Each sacrifice was made quietly so the children would not sense the depth of our struggles. On weekends, I scrubbed the floors of the cannery for extra pay. The smell of fish clung to my clothes no matter how hard I washed them. I came home late at night, exhausted only to find Miles asleep at the table, his homework scattered, Isla curled up with a book she barely read, and Rose waiting at the window, her small face pressed against the glass, as if hoping her mother might appear. Agnes Keller, my neighbor, became my silent ally. She was a widow with grown children and a kind heart. She would come by with loaves of bread or jars of preserved fruit, insisting she had extras, though I knew she went without so we could have enough. When I worked late, she would sit with the children, telling them stories about her youth or listening to their fears with patience. She never asked questions about Serena, and for that I was grateful. Despite the hardships, we began to find a fragile rhythm. Miles threw himself into school, perhaps hoping achievement would make his mother proud if she ever returned. Isla spoke little, but she started writing poems in secret notebooks, expressing what her tongue could not. Rose, though youngest, carried a brightness that sometimes broke through the gloom, humming lullabies she barely remembered. They were healing in their own ways, but the scars remained. The hardest blow came when Rose fell gravely ill. Her cough had worsened into pneumonia, and I rushed her to the hospital in a panic. The doctors asked for insurance legal consent signatures I did not have. I stood frozen helpless as machines beeped and nurses waited. That night I promised myself I would never again be powerless to protect them. It was then I hired a lawyer and began the long, painful process of securing guardianship. The legal fight drained what little savings I had left, but it was necessary. Notices were placed in newspapers, letters sent to old addresses, every attempt made to locate Serena. Weeks passed, then months, but she did not answer. When the court finally granted me guardianship, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that the children were safe in the eyes of the law, and grief that the woman who had brought them into the world had vanished so completely. From then on, I was not just their grandmother. I was their parent in every way that mattered. I took them to doctor's appointments, met with their teachers, sat through endless school plays where the lights flickered and the sound crackled. I was the one who clapped the loudest, who baked cakes for birthdays, even if they were lopsided, who whispered prayers at night when nightmares returned. But with each passing year, the question of their mother never went away. Miles asked on his 8th birthday if she would come to his party. Isla once pointed at a drawing she had made and asked if her mother would ever see it. Rose clutched her blanket one Christmas and whispered, "Will Mommy be here tomorrow?" every time I told them the same thing. She loves you, but she cannot be here right now. It was not a lie, but it was not the full truth either. The full truth was too heavy for children to carry. The years passed quickly, each one marked not by Serena's return but by milestones she missed. Miles grew taller than me. Isla began to win poetry contests, and Rose learned to play the violin with a passion that filled the house with music. They became my world, and though my body ached with age, my spirit found strength in their laughter, their progress, their very existence. Still, the silence from Serena was deafening. Not a letter, not a phone call, not even a postcard at Christmas. 13 years of absence stretched like an endless winter, and then without warning the frost cracked. One evening, as the sun bled red over the marshes, there came another knock at my door. But this time it was not a frightened young woman in the rain. It was Serena, older, sharper, and standing with a man in a tailored suit who introduced himself as her attorney. Their words cut through me like the wind that first night. She wanted her children back. She claimed I had stolen them. And in that instant, I knew the fragile peace we had built was about to shatter. The marsh was quiet when they arrived, the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, heavy and fragile. Serena stood on my porch, as if she had never left it, though time had carved sharp lines into her face. Beside her stood a tall man with a polished briefcase who introduced himself as Mr. Kent. He spoke quickly, as if speed could make his words sound kinder. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said Serena had always intended to return. He said the children had been kept from their rightful mother. I let them in because the children were home, and I did not want a scene on the porch. Miles stepped into the hallway first, then Isla, then Rose, each of them pausing when they saw her. The air shifted. Serena smiled, but it was a careful smile, measured and brittle at the edges. My heart broke a little for the girl she had once been, and hardened a little for the woman she had become. We sat at the kitchen table that had hosted birthdays and late-night homework sessions and quiet moments of sorrow. Mr. Kent placed a folder on the table and began to list demands in a voice as steady as falling rain. Custody petitions, visitation schedules, temporary arrangements while the court reviewed the case. He talked of rights and timelines and signatures. He never once used the word love. Serena stared past me at the mantel where I kept the children's photos. I wondered what she saw. Did she see the lost years, the missing birthdays, the empty chairs, or did she see something else entirely? Something with numbers and decimals and a dollar sign that I could not see, but could feel like a draft under the door. I poured tea to steady my hands. Mr. Kent continued. He said the children had suffered parental alienation. He said my guardianship was a legal trick born from confusion and lack of resources. He said my age made me unfit to handle their futures. He said a great many things, each of them smooth and practiced. And then Serena finally spoke. "Mom," she said, and the word felt strained on her tongue. I know you did what you thought was right. But they are my children. I am ready to take them back. I looked at her, at the faint tremor in her left hand, at the neat suit she had not paid for, at the polished nails and tired eyes. Ready, I repeated. Ready now after 13 years. Silence pressed in around us. Miles glanced at me, unsure whether to speak. Isla lifted her chin small and steady. Rose stared at Serena's shoes as if the truth might be hidden in the shine. It would have been easy to rage then. To shout about the nights I had soothed fevers and the mornings I had packed lunches from scraps, to list the recitals and awards and report cards Serena had never seen. But anger is a luxury when children are watching. So I sipped my tea and asked the only question that mattered. Why now? Mr. Kent answered for her. Circumstances have improved. Ms. Whitmore is in a stable position. She has support. She is prepared to fulfill her responsibilities. I nodded slowly. Earlier that week, a letter had arrived from a firm in the city. The name in the return address was familiar. It had been my brother Edward's law firm. The envelope contained a notice about his estate, a matter that had taken months to settle. There were details about funds set aside in the names of Miles, Isla, and Rose. Funds accessible only through a legal guardian or a biological parent. I had not told the children. I planned to. In time, when the chaos of grief and duty felt less raw. Now Serena had returned with a lawyer and a claim that felt rehearsed. I studied my daughter. Her gaze skittered away when mine held steady. She had never been good at silence. She filled it with noise to stay ahead of whatever truth might catch her. When her phone buzzed on the table face down, she jolted. Mr. Kent cleared his throat and placed a hand over the device, a small proprietary gesture that told me more than his speeches had. We agreed to speak again in a neutral place. It was Mr. Kent's suggestion delivered with professional concern. A cafe near the courthouse the next afternoon. He would bring documents. I could bring mine. We would discuss a transition plan. His words were clean and orderly. The future he described was not. After they left, the children crowded into the kitchen like a tide. Miles stood by the window with his hands in his pockets. Isla set down 3 teacups we did not need and squared them carefully by the saucers. Rose pressed her ear to my chest as if to check whether my heart was still beating. None of them asked what I would do. They had learned that my answers came after time and care not heat. That night, sleep hovered out of reach. I opened the leather folder. Inside were photographs I had taken on the night Serena brought the children to my door. There were letters she had written in the months after, filled with explanations that started strong and crumbled by the final lines. There was a statement she had signed that year, written in her own hand. I touched the paper and felt the weight of old ink and old choices. Then I set the folder aside and watched the window until dawn. The cafe meeting played like a rehearsal for a play that had not yet found its ending. Mr. Kent arrived first, crisp and unsmiling. Serena followed, wearing a scarf I recognized as mine from a box that had disappeared years ago. She did not apologize. She did not have to. Some losses do not return the shape they took when they left. Mr. Kent slid a document across the table. It outlined a plan that sounded reasonable from a distance and dangerous up close. Serena would take temporary custody while the court reviewed my guardianship. The children would move to her apartment. I would have visitation. The school would be notified. Records would be transferred. Everything would be tidy, clean, final. I pushed the document back. No, I said. The word felt quiet and immovable, like a stone placed in the path of a stream. Serena flinched. Mr. Kent did not. Then his phone chimed, and this time he checked it. A small frown tugged at his mouth. He looked at Serena. There is a deadline, he said. A deadline for what I asked. He hesitated, and in that small pause, I heard everything. Pressure, debt, accounts in red, promises made to people who do not wait. Serena stared at the tabletop as if the grain of the wood might rearrange into a lifeline. We left without agreement. As I walked home, the wind off the water cut through my coat. The cottage felt both safe and suddenly too fragile. I made soup. I watched Isla write. I listened to Miles play with the stubborn lock on the back door. I let Rose tuck her violin under her chin and draw a clear line of sound through the afternoon. Just after sunset, my phone lit up with messages. At first they sounded like apologies stretched into requests. By midnight they had sharpened into threats dressed as warnings. If you do not cooperate, this will get worse. Judges favor mothers. Think about what you are risking. Think about what you stand to lose. In the morning I took the leather folder from the shelf and set it in my bag. The sky over the marsh was the color of pewter. We dressed in our best clothes. We walked together to the courthouse, the children on either side of me like anchors and sails. When we entered the courtroom, Serena was already there. She would not meet my eyes. Mr. Kent arranged his papers into perfect stacks, as if symmetry could conjure mercy. Judge Rourke took the bench, his expression grave and tired. The bailiff called for order. I felt the weight of the folder against my ribs and heard the storm of 13 years gather in the rafters. The judge asked if there was anything I wished to present before he considered temporary orders. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, and placed the leather folder on the table. The room leaned in. Serena went very still, and somewhere behind us the first drop of rain struck the tall window like a promise. "Shall we begin?" The courtroom had been filled with murmurs and shifting bodies, but when I laid the leather folder on the table, the noise drained away as if someone had pulled the air from the room. My fingers lingered on the cover. For years I had guarded it like a treasure, though what it held was not gold or jewels but scraps of paper and fragments of a forgotten truth. Now, with my daughter glaring at me from across the aisle and my grandchildren watching with wide, uncertain eyes, I knew it was time to open it. Judge Rourke leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bench, his glasses sliding slightly down the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "if you believe this folder contains material that could alter the understanding of this case, the court will allow you to present it. But understand this. Once revealed, these documents become part of the official record." "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" I met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor, I am certain." Serena shifted in her seat, the veneer of calm cracking around her edges. She looked at her lawyer, then back at me, her lips parting as if to form words she could not quite voice. "Mom," she whispered, "do not, please." But the time for silence was long past. I unclasped the worn metal buckle and spread the folder open. The first item I drew out was a bundle of photographs tied with a fraying red ribbon. The images faded now, with time had been taken the night Serena brought the children to my door. I passed them to the clerk who carried them to the judge. His brows knitted as he looked. "Describe these, Mrs. Whitmore," he instructed. "The first photograph shows Miles." I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. He was only 8 years old. His shirt was stained, his shoes had holes in the soles, his face was smudged with dirt. The second shows Isla, 6 years old then. Her hair was tangled, and she had dried food stuck to her cheek. She looked tired beyond her years. And the third is Rose. She was only 3, wearing a diaper that had not been changed for hours. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Gasps rose from the gallery. The judge passed the photos to Mr. Kent, who reviewed them quickly before sliding them toward Serena. She flinched when she saw them, her hands covering her mouth. "I did not take these to shame her," I said. "A neighbor who worked as a nurse told me to document the condition of the children in case questions arose later." I did not know then how important that advice would be. The judge nodded and motioned for me to continue. Next I drew out a stack of letters, their paper creased and yellowing. "These are from Serena, written during the first 6 months after she left." I recognized the sharp intake of breath from my daughter even before she spoke. "That is not true. I never wrote those." The judge ignored her protest and gestured for the letters to be handed over. As he read the first, his expression hardened. I explained. "In this letter, written 3 weeks after she left, Serena tells me she has met a man named Victor Crane. She says she is moving to another city with him. She asks me to keep the children a little longer because, in her words, he does not want the burden of a ready-made family." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The second letter, I continued, came 2 months later. In it, Serena says she is expecting a child with Victor. She writes that he has threatened to leave her if she brings her other children into their new life. A murmur spread through the audience. Miles dropped his gaze to the floor while Isla squeezed Rose's hand until their knuckles turned white. "And the third letter," I said, my voice growing sharper, "was the final one she sent me. In it, she offered me $500 if I would officially give up any claim to her children, to everything. She wanted a clean slate. She wanted to disappear." Mr. Kent shifted uncomfortably, realizing these were not the details he had prepared for. Serena shook her head violently. "Lies," she hissed, though her voice cracked with each syllable. Finally, I reached for the last document, the one that had sat folded at the bottom of the folder for 13 years. "This is the most important of all," I said quietly. A statement written in Serena's own hand, dated 3 days after she left the children with me. The clerk carried it to Judge Rourke. He read in silence, his jaw tightening with each line. Then he looked up, his eyes piercing through the dim courtroom. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is a renunciation of parental rights." The words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples of shock through the room. "Read it aloud, Your Honor," I said. "Let everyone hear it." The judge cleared his throat. "I, Serena Whitmore, 26 years of age, hereby relinquish all legal, medical, and custodial rights over my children, Miles Whitmore, Isla Whitmore, and Rose Whitmore. I acknowledge that I am not emotionally or financially capable of raising them. I authorize my mother, Clara Whitmore, to make all decisions for them now and in the future." Signed, Serena Whitmore. The silence that followed was broken only by Serena's sobbing. "I was sick," she wailed. "I did not know what I was doing. I was not in my right mind." The judge tapped his gavel once for order, though his voice softened slightly when he spoke again. "This court will examine the validity of this document. But what has been presented here cannot be ignored." I looked at my daughter. For a moment I saw the frightened girl she had been, the girl who had made choices out of desperation and weakness. But then I remembered the text messages she had sent me only weeks before, filled with threats and demands. The girl was gone. The woman before me was something else entirely. The judge turned back to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything else to present at this time?" I placed the folder flat on the table. "Yes, Your Honor. But I believe it is time you hear from the ones most affected by all of this, the children themselves." The gallery shifted as the three of them looked up in surprise. Miles straightened, Isla's lips parted, and Rose clutched her notebook to her chest. Their time had come to speak. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath when I asked the judge to hear the children. For years I had carried the weight of their story alone, protecting them with silence. Now it was time for their own voices to break through. Judge Rourke adjusted his glasses, studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin with the eldest." Miles rose slowly from his seat in the gallery. At 21, he was tall and broad-shouldered, but I could see the boy he had been in the way his hands flexed nervously at his sides. He walked to the witness stand with a calm determination, as though each step was a decision he had already made long ago. The bailiff swore him in, and the judge leaned forward. "Miles," the judge said, "you are of age and may speak freely. Do you remember your mother from when you were young?" Miles shifted, his eyes flickering briefly towards Serena before settling on the judge. "I remember fragments, Your Honor," he said. "I remember confusion. I remember empty cupboards. I remember my grandmother arriving with groceries because otherwise we would not have eaten. I remember the night we showed up at her door, soaked and crying. She bathed us, dressed us, and gave us soup. That is the memory that has stayed with me the longest." "And how do you feel about her absence?" the judge asked gently. "For a long time I was angry," Miles admitted, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. "I watched other kids get picked up by their parents after games and performances. I watched them celebrate birthdays surrounded by family. I had my grandmother. She worked 2 jobs, came home exhausted, and still helped me with homework. She never missed a school meeting. She was my parent in every way." He paused, drawing in a breath before continuing. "When I turned 15, I stopped being angry. I realized that anger was wasted energy. Instead, I started to see what my grandmother had sacrificed for us. She gave up her health, her comfort, and her peace so that we could have ours. And now that my biological mother is back, demanding custody, I cannot pretend the last 13 years did not happen." He turned his eyes directly to Serena. "Mom," he said, "if I can call you that, I am glad to see you alive and well. I am glad you found a way to build a life. But I cannot forget that you left us behind when we needed you most. You chose another path." Grandma chose us. That is the truth. The silence was heavy as Miles stepped down, his shoulders squared, though his eyes shimmered with unspoken grief. Isla rose next. She was 19, her frame slender, her movements graceful but tense. When she reached the stand, her gaze flicked toward Serena, then away. The bailiff swore her in, and the judge gave her the same gentle invitation. "Isla, do you remember your mother?" "I remember more than my brother does," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I remember her crying for hours, staying in bed all day. I remember being hungry and not knowing what to do. And I remember the night we came here to Grandma's house. It was the first night I felt safe. She tucked me in. She read us stories. She told us everything would be all right." Serena shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Isla continued. "Grandma never let us feel abandoned. She took me to a psychologist when I stopped speaking. She encouraged me to write when I could not talk. When I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes at 14, she learned everything about nutrition and glucose and needles, even though she was scared. She never complained. She just kept loving us." The judge nodded. "And what about your mother now?" Isla hesitated, then lifted her chin. "To me, she is a stranger. I know we share blood, but love is not made of blood alone. Love is made of actions. Grandma has been my mother in every action. That is who I choose." Her words cut through the room like glass, sharp and unyielding. She stepped down, leaving a trail of silence behind her. Finally, Rose stood. At 17, she was still young enough to cling to hope, but old enough to understand betrayal. She walked to the stand with a fire in her eyes that reminded me painfully of Serena when she was her age. When she spoke, her voice was steady but carried the tremor of buried hurt. "I was very little when we came to live with Grandma," she began. "But I remember things. I remember being hungry. I remember crying and no one coming. I remember the smell of that apartment we lived in. It smelled like sadness." Her gaze flicked to Serena, who was trembling visibly now. "But I also remember the first night at Grandma's house. She gave me a warm bath. She put me in pajamas that smelled like soap. She gave me milk with honey and sang me a lullaby. That was the first time I felt safe." The judge leaned forward. "And now, Rose, how do you feel about your mother returning?" Rose's eyes filled with tears, but her voice did not break. "I am curious about her. I want to know who she is, but I am also scared. I am scared she will leave again. I am scared her promises will vanish like before. I want to stay with Grandma because she has never lied to me, never failed me, never walked away." Her words hung in the air like a final note of music. She stepped down, and all three children returned to their seats. They did not look at Serena, they looked at me. Judge Rourke tapped his gavel lightly. "Their testimony has been heard," he said. "It is clear where their trust lies. But before I consider this matter further, Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything else to present?" I placed my hand on the leather folder once more. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "There is still one more truth this court must hear." The judge inclined his head. "Very well, Mrs. Whitmore. What is it?" I pulled the final sheet of paper from the folder, folded and refolded until its creases were worn thin. My daughter's face went pale, and her lawyer stiffened in his chair. The weight of the moment pressed down on us all. "This," I said quietly, "is a document that changes everything." The folded sheet in my hands felt heavier than any stone, though it was only paper. I had carried it for over a decade, tucked away in silence, waiting for the day when truth would no longer be a choice but a necessity. Now, under the pale light of the courtroom lamps and the steady gaze of Judge Rourke, the time had come. "Your Honor," I began, "this is a document written and signed by my daughter Serena 3 days after she left her children with me. It is not a letter, not a request, but a declaration." The clerk carried it to the bench. Judge Rourke unfolded the paper slowly, as if sensing the gravity it carried. His lips pressed into a line as he read. After a long pause, he looked up. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is a voluntary renunciation of parental rights." The words fell into the room like thunder. People in the gallery gasped. Mr. Kent sprang from his seat, his face flushed. "Your Honor, this cannot be admissible. My client was unwell at the time. She was not of sound mind." Judge Rourke raised a hand, silencing him. The paper itself speaks. He cleared his throat and read aloud. I, Serena Whitmore, 26 years of age, hereby relinquish all legal, medical, and custodial rights over my children Miles, Isla, and Rose. I acknowledge I am not capable of raising them and authorize my mother, Clara Whitmore, to make all decisions regarding their care. Signed, Serena Whitmore, dated the 18th of October 2009. The words echoed, filling every corner of the chamber. Serena buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I was sick, she cried. I was desperate. I did not know what I was writing, but my mind flashed back to Paula Sterling, the landlady of Serena's old apartment. She had told me Serena had asked for pen and paper that she had written for hours before sealing the note in an envelope and leaving it behind with other belongings. Paula had said Serena seemed calm, even resolute, as though she had finally decided to free herself from a burden she had never wanted. Your Honor, I said, there are witnesses who can confirm she wrote this voluntarily with full awareness of her decision. Serena's lawyer pressed his lips together, his earlier confidence unraveling. He whispered frantically in her ear, but she shook her head, sobbing harder. The judge's voice cut through the noise. This court will not ignore the existence of this document. Whether my final ruling hinges upon it or not, it reveals a history of abandonment that cannot be erased by claims of illness. I nodded, but I was not finished. Your Honor, there is more. From the folder, I produced another stack of papers, newer, sharper, more damning. These are records from a private investigator I hired 2 months ago. When Serena appeared suddenly with a lawyer demanding custody, I knew there was something more behind her return. The judge motioned for the clerk to bring him the documents. He flipped through bank statements, eviction notices, and loan records. His eyes grew darker with each page. These records, I said, show that Serena and her partner Victor Crane are drowning in debt. They owe more than $30,000. They received an eviction notice 4 months ago. 2 months ago, just after my brother Edward's death, they began inquiring about his estate. The room stirred. Whispers spread like fire. My brother Edward had left a significant inheritance to each of the grandchildren funds, only accessible through a guardian or parent. I had already filed paperwork to ensure those funds were secured in trust until the children came of age, but Serena's sudden reappearance was no coincidence. Judge Rourke raised his brows. Are you suggesting your daughter returned solely for financial gain? I met his gaze without wavering. I am not suggesting, Your Honor. I am certain. At that moment, Serena lifted her head, her tear-streaked face pale and raw. That is not true, she shouted, her voice breaking. I came back because I love them. I miss them every single day. Miles shifted in his seat, his face twisted in pain. Isla gripped her notebook tightly. Rose stared at her mother with eyes full of questions she had never dared ask. But I had not yet revealed the darkest truth. Your Honor, I said quietly after Serena appeared. She called me one night. For the first time in 13 years, I heard her voice on the other end of the phone. At first, she said she wanted her children back because she had matured, because she could finally provide for them. But when I asked about the inheritance, her tone changed. I pulled another sheet from the folder, printed text messages. After that call, she sent me these messages. Threats. Ultimatums. She told me that if I did not hand over custody voluntarily, she would accuse me of kidnapping. She promised she would ruin me in court unless I surrendered not only the children but control of the money. The judge read the pages, his jaw tightening. He handed them to Mr. Kent, whose face drained of color as he skimmed the words. One message stood out in black ink, sharp as a knife. Mom, if you give me custody, we can split the inheritance 50-50. If you force me to fight, I get everything. The room erupted in shocked whispers. The judge pounded his gavel. Order. When the noise settled, his voice was low but heavy with anger. Extortion is a crime, Mrs. Whitmore. These messages are clear evidence. Serena shook her head violently, tears streaming. I was desperate, she sobbed. I did not mean it. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. The judge folded his hands. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any final evidence before we move to testimonies? I looked down at the folder. My fingers brushed the bottom seam where one last folded page remained. The most painful secret of all. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my grandchildren's eyes on me. Yes, Your Honor, I said at last, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. There is one more truth. One that even my grandchildren do not yet know. The courtroom stilled again, the storm outside rattling the windows like it too leaned in to listen. The last sheet of paper lay heavy in my hand. My heart pounded so loud I wondered if the whole courtroom could hear it. Judge Rourke waited patiently, his eyes steady, his gavel resting at his side. Serena leaned forward, her face pale and her lips trembling. She knew what I held. She knew the storm it would unleash. This, I said, unfolding the paper slowly, is a document I found among the belongings Serena left behind all those years ago. It is her renunciation of parental rights written in her own hand, signed and dated. The judge had already read it, but now it became part of the official record. The words were spoken aloud once more, echoing through the chamber like a final toll of a bell. When he finished reading, silence reigned. Serena collapsed into her chair, her sobs raw and desperate. I was sick, she wailed. I was broken. I did not know what I was doing. Judge Rourke's gaze hardened. The medical records you submitted, Mrs. Whitmore, show that you had been discharged from psychiatric treatment 2 months before this document was signed. They show you were declared stable and capable of making decisions. Her lawyer, Mr. Kent, shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, he began, surely we must consider context. But the judge cut him off. Context does not erase ink on paper. Context does not excuse 13 years of absence. He turned his attention back to me. Mrs. Whitmore, in light of these documents and the testimony of your grandchildren, I am prepared to deliver my ruling, but before I do, I must ask you, do you wish to pursue charges of extortion against your daughter? The question rang in my ears. For weeks I had imagined this very moment, to see Serena held accountable, to watch her face the consequences of her threats. And yet, looking at her now broken and weeping, I felt the weight of a choice heavier than any I had ever made. No, Your Honor, I said at last. I do not wish to pursue criminal charges. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Serena's shoulders sagged with relief, though tears still streamed down her cheeks. But I am requesting a restraining order, I continued firmly. For a minimum of 5 years, Serena must not contact me or the children unless they choose to do so when they are of age. Judge Rourke nodded. That is a reasonable request. Anything else? Yes, Your Honor. I ask that it be recorded in the public record that Serena Whitmore voluntarily relinquished her parental rights on the 18th of October 2009, and that any future claims she makes be considered frivolous unless supported by undeniable new evidence. So ordered, the judge said, his pen scratching across the record. Serena shot up from her seat, her face streaked with tears. You cannot take them from me forever. They are mine. I turned to her, my voice quiet but unwavering. You gave them up, Serena. 13 years ago you left them. I did not steal them. I protected them. The judge's gavel struck the desk sharply. This court hereby rules that permanent legal guardianship of Isla and Rose Whitmore shall remain with Mrs. Clara Whitmore. The petition for custody filed by Ms. Serena Whitmore is dismissed. Furthermore, a 5-year restraining order is issued effective immediately. The sound of the gavel echoed like the closing of a door. Serena slumped back, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear, but she did not respond. She was lost in her own collapse. Then unexpectedly Miles stood. Your Honor, may I say something? The judge gave a slight nod. Miles approached the stand once more, his voice calm but strong. I want it on record that we do not consider Serena our mother. She is the woman who gave us life, but the one who raised us, who loved us, who never left us, is our grandmother. She is our mother in every way that matters. His words broke whatever strength Serena had left. She covered her face, shaking with sobs. Emily rose next, her notebook clutched to her chest. Your Honor, she said, I do not hate Serena, but I do not know her. To me she is a stranger who shares my blood. My family is here with my grandmother. Rose stood beside her siblings, her voice soft but clear. If she had come back for love, we might have had a chance. But she came back for money. That tells us everything. Their words struck deeper than any evidence I had presented. It was the children themselves who had spoken the truth no one could deny. Judge Rourke's voice carried solemn authority as he declared the ruling final. This court is closed. The gavel struck one last time, and the storm inside the courtroom broke. Lawyers shuffled papers. The gallery emptied in hushed whispers. The bailiff called for order as people filed out, but the real noise was in my heart beating hard against my ribs. My grandchildren surrounded me, their arms wrapping around me in a silent embrace that said everything words could not. For a moment I let myself breathe. For a moment I let myself believe it was over. But as we stepped into the hallway, Serena rose from her chair and staggered toward us. Her lawyer tried to hold her back, but she pushed past him. Her voice cracked desperate. "Mom," she whispered, "please talk to me." I turned my grandchildren close by my side. For years I had dreamed of hearing her ask for forgiveness. For years I had rehearsed what I might say. Now standing in the dim hallway with her tears staining her face, I felt only sorrow. "Have you changed, Serena?" I asked quietly. "Or do you just need money?" Her eyes flickered with shame. Both, she admitted. And with that confession, the fragile peace we had found in the courtroom shattered again. The courthouse emptied slowly, footsteps echoing off the marble floors like the fading rumble of thunder after a storm. My grandchildren pressed close to me, their arms warm around my shoulders, their faces pale but steady. The gavel had fallen. The ruling was clear. But peace does not arrive with a single strike of wood against wood. Peace takes longer. Sometimes it does not come at all. We walked out into the gray afternoon. The storm had passed, but puddles glistened in the streets, reflecting broken clouds. I breathed in the damp air, trying to anchor myself. Miles carried Rose's violin case, holding it with the care of someone who knew what fragile things meant. Isla walked beside me, her notebook clutched to her chest as if it were her shield. Behind us, Serena staggered into the sunlight, her lawyer trailing her like a shadow he no longer wished to carry. She called after me once, her voice cracked and desperate. "Mom." Just one word. But I did not turn. I could not. Not then. Not after everything. The days that followed should have been calm, but calmness is not what abandonment leaves behind. The children carried invisible wounds, and I carried my own. At night I heard Miles pacing his room, unable to settle. Isla wrote furiously in her notebooks, page after page, her words spilling faster than her tears. Rose played her violin until her fingers ached, the strings trembling under her bow as if they too carried grief. I tried to hold us together. I cooked meals. I kept routines. I smiled when they needed me to smile. But sometimes when the house was quiet, I felt the hollowness settle in. 13 years of waiting for Serena to return, and when she did, it was for money, not love. I had hoped for something different, even as I feared it would never come. 3 weeks after the trial, my neighbor Agnes knocked on my door with a basket of bread and a worried expression. She sat at my kitchen table, her hands folded tight. "Clara," she said gently, "there is something you should know." Her words came like stones dropped into still water. Serena was alone. Victor had left her. He had taken their son Paul with him. The debts remained, but the man she had chosen over her children had vanished. She was living in a small apartment downtown, working nights, cleaning offices, barely able to pay for food. I said nothing at first. My hands tightened around my teacup until the porcelain rattled against the saucer. Despite everything, despite the threats, the lies, the courtroom, she was still my daughter. That evening, when the children were asleep, I drove into the city. The building was old, its paint peeling, its stairwell dim and smelling of mildew. I knocked on the door of apartment 3B, and after a long pause it opened. Serena stood there, thin, exhausted, her eyes ringed with dark shadows. When she saw me, she froze. "Mom," she whispered, as if the word itself hurt. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the bags in my arms. "Food. Enough for a week." She stepped aside silently, and I entered. The apartment was bare furnished, with little more than a table, a chair, and a mattress on the floor. Unpaid bills were stacked in uneven piles. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice breaking. "Why would you come here after everything?" "Because," I said softly, "you are still my daughter, and no matter what you have done, I cannot let you starve." She collapsed into sobs, her body shaking. I sat beside her, my hands folded in my lap. She confessed between tears. Victor had left when the money disappeared. He had said he could not stay with a woman who had given away a fortune. She had begged him to stay, but he walked out, taking Paul with him. She had nothing left, nothing but shame. For a moment I saw the frightened girl she had once been, too young and too fragile to be a mother. My heart ached with sorrow, but sorrow is not the same as trust. You lost them because you abandoned them, I said gently. Not because someone took them from you. You chose once and then you chose again. And now you must live with those choices. She lifted her head, her eyes red. Is there any way I can see them? Just once. Not yet, I replied firmly. Not until they are ready. That decision belongs to them now, not to me, not to you. I left her there in that small apartment, the sound of her sobs following me down the stairwell. I did not know if I had done the right thing. Compassion and protection are hard to balance, but I knew one thing. The children were safe, and I intended to keep it that way. Life began to settle again in our little house by the marsh. Miles started his college studies working late into the night with determination in his eyes. Isla began sharing her poetry at small community gatherings, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled. Rose practiced her violin daily, her music carrying through the walls like a prayer. We were moving forward even with shadows trailing us. But the past does not stay buried forever. One evening, as the sun set crimson over the horizon, Agnes came by again. Her face was troubled. Clara, she said, I thought you should know. Serena has been asking about the children, not directly but through neighbors, through whispers. She has not broken the restraining order, but she lingers on the edges asking if they are well, if they need anything. A knot twisted in my chest. What did that mean? Was she preparing to try again? Was she truly changing, or was it only another ploy? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling while the storm winds rattled the shutters. I thought of Serena alone in her apartment, stripped of everything she had traded her children for. I thought of my grandchildren thriving at last, but still carrying scars too deep for words. Compassion pulled at me. Protection held me still. Between them stretched a path I did not yet know how to walk, and as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought haunted me. The storm may have ended in the courtroom, but storms have a way of circling back. The days grew longer as spring turned into summer. The marsh outside my cabin shimmered in the evening light, reeds swaying gently in the breeze. Life was calmer, now steadier. The restraining order gave us breathing space, and the children began to step into futures of their own. But even in the quiet, I sometimes felt the shadow of Serena lingering at the edges, a reminder that storms rarely vanish completely. They leave behind clouds that drift back when the wind changes. Miles thrived in his studies. He had been accepted into a prestigious engineering program with a scholarship that eased the burden I once feared we could not carry. He came home on weekends, always bringing stories of his professors, his projects, and his growing circle of friends. I watched him speak with the confidence of a young man who knew his path. It made me proud, but it also made me ache. For so many years I had worried whether he would even reach adulthood unbroken. Now he stood tall, proof that love and stability could reshape a wounded child. Isla was quieter, but her growth was no less remarkable. She shared her poems at small community gatherings, her voice soft but steady as she spoke of rain, silence, and the fragile strength of roots. The audience always leaned in, moved by her honesty. She was finding her voice after years of holding it back, and every poem she read felt like a step away from the silence her mother had left her in. Rose filled the house with music. Every day the violin sang through the rooms, sometimes bright and playful, sometimes haunting and low. She was preparing for her school recital, and her dedication was relentless. When she played, I saw not just a girl but a survivor. She had been 3 years old when her world crumbled, yet here she was creating beauty from the echoes of sorrow. I cherish those moments of peace, but the world has a way of reminding us that peace is fragile. One afternoon, my neighbor Agnes visited again. She hesitated at the door, her expression heavy with worry. "Clara," she said gently, "I must tell you something. Serena has been attending therapy. She has been working 2 jobs, one at a medical clinic as a receptionist and another cleaning in the evenings. She looks healthier, stronger. She has not asked to see the children, but she speaks of them with longing." Her words sank into me like stones. For years I had wanted Serena to change, to grow, to heal, and now perhaps she was. But my heart was torn. Change does not erase the past. Healing does not undo wounds. Could she truly rebuild what she had abandoned? Weeks passed, and I thought often about what Agnes had told me. Then one morning a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from Serena. She did not beg. She did not demand. Instead, she wrote of her therapy, of the work she was doing to understand herself. She admitted her failings in words sharper than any I could have written. She confessed the fear that had driven her to run. She spoke of regret that shadowed every day of her life. And at the end, she wrote only one request. Not for custody, not for money, only for forgiveness. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter open before me. The children had grown strong. They had built lives. They had found stability. Could they ever open themselves to the woman who had left them? That was not my decision to make. It had to be theirs. That evening, I gathered them around the table and handed them the letter. Miles read it first, his brow furrowed but his eyes softening as he reached the end. Isla traced the words with her fingers, silent but thoughtful. Rose clutched the paper tightly, her expression torn between curiosity and pain. "What do we do?" she whispered. "You do nothing until you are ready," I told them. "Forgiveness is not something that can be forced. It is a gift only you can choose to give, if you ever wish to." They nodded, each lost in their own thoughts. The letter remained on the table for days past, between them read and reread. No one rushed to decide, and that I realized was the right choice. Some answers take time. Months later, on a warm autumn afternoon, we gathered in the garden. Miles had returned from college with news of his first job offer. Isla had received word that one of her poems would be published in a local journal. Rose had performed her recital and been offered the chance to join a youth orchestra. They were flourishing. As we sat together under the fading light laughter, carrying across the marsh, I felt a peace deeper than any I had known in years. Still, my thoughts wandered to Serena. She was out there somewhere, rebuilding her life brick by brick. Perhaps she would truly change. Perhaps one day the children would be ready to see her, or perhaps they never would. That choice belonged to them, and I would honor it either way. As night fell, I looked at the three faces around me, faces I had watched grow from frightened children into strong, resilient young adults. The storm had tested us, broken us, and reshaped us, but we had endured. Love had endured, and in the end, that was all that mattered. This story is about choices. Serena chose to leave her children, and those choices had consequences that could not be erased. I chose to protect them, even when it meant sacrifice and pain, and that choice shaped the course of their lives. Love is not measured by words or blood. It is measured by action, by who stays when it is hardest to stay, by who sacrifices when there is nothing left to give. Forgiveness may come someday, but forgiveness does not erase truth. Justice is not revenge. Justice is simply living with the weight of the choices we make. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might need its message, and leave a comment to tell me what you think about the choices these characters made. And if you want to hear more powerful life stories like this one, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps me bring more stories to life.